You're listening to the Mentors for Military podcast with your host, Robert Gowin, Rudy Lindsey, Mike Pretz, and Kaelin, with special guest host, Scott Kinder. I know, at least for me, when I was coming up in the military, I became an E5 when I was 19 years old, had no clue really what that meant, and was put into a situation in a unit that at that time frame was a little high-speed kind of unit, and the demands that were there instantly from the moment I walked in the door, I don't think I was ready for. And it wasn't like I had somebody that was, walked up to me and said, hey, I'll be your mentor. I'll be the guy that's going to help you get through this and the whole bit. If anything, it was more adjust fire as you go along and learn under the flame type of thing. So as time went on, I grew into the leader mainly by watching and learning, and obviously making a hell of a lot of mistakes along the way. And so that development for me was very painful until I met a few leaders that gave me some true mentorship in my journey, but most of it was by trial and error. And I don't know that we ever really have done a good job within the military, organizational culture standpoint, of creating that leadership. Other than, of course, you had the, PNOC or PODC or PLC or whatever they're calling it now, the leaders course and those types of things. But you know what I mean? As far as like,
I personally think those courses are so dumbed down now,
right,
that you don't get a whole lot out of it. At least from my experiences, even going all the way back to PLDC. And I think I had a little bit of a different experience, Robert, in that when I first came in the military, I fell right into, a solid team leader and squad leader who basically but for lack of a better word, beat me into submission and kind of showed me, what the rights and wrongs and do's and don'ts and all that. And then on the side, helped mentor and show me proper leadership. And I've run with that ever since. And it's always worked.
I mean, I think that you nailed it in the description, right? With the mentorship and mistakes being the two key words you kind of said there. If you're talking leadership development, I mean, I had a pretty steep curve, as we've talked about in past shows, with being an 18 X-ray and coming straight off the street as a civilian and not knowing jack or anything about the military or even being a leader. So I guess, being mentored even subconsciously by some of the cadre and the staff and the people through the Q course and then getting on the ODA, that was just trial by fire, like you said. I mean, and it was, you could pick up 1,000 nuggets along the way, but it was definitely a steep learning curve. And I'm jealous of guys like Rudy, who grew up in a kind of that elite Ranger bat type organization where leadership is just ingrained throughout everything that you do day and night. I told you, Robert, earlier on the phone, I finished Violence of Action by Marty Scoveland about the Rangers in Afghanistan and kind of the history. And I'm not Ranger qualified. I am not a Ranger. I never served in Ranger Battalion, but I'm deeply in awe of just their ethos and what they do and the mentality of the entire organization. So listening to McChrystal and his books lately and talking, Ranger Battalion stuff and leadership development, it's just, I'm in awe of the people throughout. And, I could pick Rudy's brains for hours and hours about some experiences he had as a young, enlisted guy in Ranger Battalion before he went to, Special Forces. But I think it's pretty cool, and it's a great topic that a lot of people are missing. And I see that definitely in the civilian world, that we're missing a whole heap of leadership development across the board. And there's all these false paradigms of what leadership actually is that are completely flawed and just absolutely incorrect.
Having worked with the SOF units, that's something that I am envious of, as like when I came into the military, because I think it's so crucial to have that first influence, because it really dictates how the rest of your career is going to go, and how you're going to turn out as a leader. And when I got to actually go over there and work with them, and I saw the dynamic of these young privates, like 18 years old, having these war heroes be their influence and the people that they're going to eventually turn into, is why they are so good at what they do, and their leadership is so much better than the rest of the Army. And I think it's really critical right when you come in to have a good leader and not somebody that can just, let you float.
Yeah, I actually got lucky, to my point before, and it wasn't all peaches, creams, and rainbows. It's allowing young, up-and-coming leaders to make their own mistakes and learn from those mistakes. It's like your kid, man. You could tell them all day long, no, don't do that. But if you don't allow them to do it, if you don't allow him to touch the stove and burn his finger, he'll always be curious and want to jack around with it. I was fortunate enough to fall under some guys that actually allowed me to make mistakes, and I made plenty of them. I can guarantee you that.
And you will, right? I mean, it's the old the old saying, right? I mean, give a guy a fish or teach a guy to fish, but sometimes, we don't take it far enough in the story, and we realize that when you're teaching somebody to fish, some days they're going to come home hungry because they don't catch anything.
Exactly.
And those days are teaching moments, and those moments, especially when there's some type of pain attached to it or what we all deem failure attached to it, that's when lessons are truly learned, and those lessons are ingrained in our hearts, and that's what you grow from.
And what's really neat, taking those leadership traits, I think, are just extremely valuable. And it's not just SOF guys; it's across the military. And you take a good leader, because SOF has their crappy leaders as well. Not everybody's
Amen.
cut out to be a leader, but when you take those leadership traits, and you transition that into the civilian and corporate sector, it's amazing what can be accomplished. It really is, because it just translates so well.
It's funny when you mention about not everybody's a born leader, or not everybody's a leader. There's also a belief that not everybody can be turned into a leader. And I definitely believe that. I think there are people that end up getting promoted, especially when you think of the military, that end up getting promoted and then struggle with truly what leadership is, and tend to hide behind more of the rank and the position and the role, and think that that's true leadership, and it's not. And you even find that in the private sector. I think some organizations try to develop their staff and their leadership teams or management teams as they start being developed into a leader to think more strategically and broader across the organization. But even still, you may not find true leadership training or courses or something like that internally until you reach a very high level, a director, a vice president, or something of that. And I'm talking about large corporations, obviously. I'm talking about, publicly traded, several $billion, 40,000 employee type organizations. Then these smaller organizations where you may only be a $200 million company, they may not have the funds to be able to do any type of developmental training for leadership. You're going to have to fly by the seat of your pants and learn that kind of stuff on your own.
But it's those character traits that have been instilled in those military leaders that will allow them to excel. If they leverage it correctly, that will allow them to excel in that corporate arena.
Yeah, agreed. I think military have an advantage coming out, of course, because we learn so many things by trial and error in a real life or death situation that's much more stressful, I think, unless you're in a life or death occupation out here in the private sector, such as a doctor or a nurse or something of that nature that's a health professional or a first responder. You may not ever see that type of stress that you experience within the military, where you're having to make quick decisions. You may not feel that type of stress until you're at a much higher level, but still, even then, you have time. So I agree. If you're making the transition and you learned well while on active duty, you should be that much better than your peers out in the private sector.
Yeah,
it's an unequal playing field, right? Because in the military, ideally, and again, I've never claimed to be like Joe military. I'm not retired or anything like that. But, from my experiences, you go to a board, you get selected, you get promoted, you change units, you do a lot of stuff. And your leadership development grows with you through time and energy, and kind of this pro forma system that is long established, a couple hundred years, and is, fixed and updated on the fly. But in civilians, so that's what we expect when we leave the military. We expect this same type of formal procedure for promotions and leadership development and everything else. But in the civilian world, oftentimes you get promoted to length of time in the company, or tenure with the company, or hitting your sales goals, or hitting whatever else. And I think that there's a massive divide between being good at your job and what you're paid to do, and having any type of leadership, or I hate the word manager, but managerial responsibilities, right? Because the best salesperson in your organization that can making close deals does not equate to a sales manager, and it does not equate definitely to a VP of sales or the director of sales or anything like that. That just means a guy is good at selling ketchup, or ketchup to women wearing white gloves, or ice Eskimos, or whatever other sales cliches you want to throw out there. So I think that there's this whole kind of belief in the civilian world that through time with the company or natural tendencies, you'll just figure it out. And we don't inoculate them and teach them this strategic development, but we give them the buzzwords like, all right, go and develop strategy. And they go, okay, yeah, I got it. And they have no idea what they're talking about. They don't understand the 3 towers. They don't understand any of that stuff. And transitioning, to take it back to the military people, that's why there's such a frustration throughout the prior military force. And then the people that get it, you go on LinkedIn, you can see like, this is why you should hire a prior military all over the place. But the people that get it in the civilian world who never served, they get it, and they know that we bring a lot to the table. But the people that don't get it want to guard that, because now you're talking fear and inadequacies and all the other type of psychological issues that come into play when there's some misguided playing field that you're now on.
But like we just said, though, not everybody in the military came from cut from the same cloth. I mean, good God, I have met so many bad leaders along the way within the military that actually helped me develop, like we talked about earlier. So even though you can say it's not an equal playing field when you come out, that's only for those of us who survived and actually learned from those mistakes and wanted to do better in influencing our subordinates and being a true leader and learning from those mistakes. There are individuals that come out that may have the rank or title because their NCOER or their OER looked very well while they were on active duty, and they were promoted into positions and roles that should have never been put in that type of position. And then when they transition, they're moved into maybe hierarchy because of where they were within the military.
Rudy's going to laugh when I say it, Coming from SF, I mean, how many total jackrabbits do you know that didn't do anything but have perfect NCOERs, 100% disability, because they were the guys that every time they got an ingrown toenail, they went to the medic, they had it logged in their soap notes, and they had whatever else. And, I'm not putting myself in either field here, but there were other guys that were just too busy taking the fight down range and trying to train and better yourselves that, when I left, I get 0 disability, I get 0 anything, I don't get any retirement. I had no time for any of that stuff because there was a war going on, right? And I'm not like trying to wave the flag here or whatever, but and God bless them for being infinitely better prepared professionally for the civilian world than I was when I left. But there are guys who didn't do anything, but like you said, Robert, they know how to check those boxes and do all that. And now all of a sudden they're in absolute positions of importance within the civilian world because of this, inflated resume, and they know how to play the game. And then there are other guys, and I know 1,000 just absolute amazing pipe hitters who would be amazing in almost any role in any organization that aren't employed or don't know what to do or aren't capitalizing fully on their opportunities because they don't know how to translate those very same skills with the same kind of eloquence and frankly, BS that the other person did. So it's kind of across the board that those who know how to play the game play it, and those who don't lose, I guess.
I mean, you make a good point, especially when it comes to doing your job and not taking the higher route, I guess you could say, or the good boy system that is definitely in both the civilian sector and the military. But I mean, if you think about it, in the military, if you have a bad leader, you can go to the next squad or the next unit or somebody, just look at their chest. You're going to see what rank they are, talk about their experience. I mean, you can look at them and see where they come from. But I think what's really hard is that when you transition to the civilian sector, you can't just turn around and find another NCO to mentor you. You know what I mean? Like, oh, this is my boss. This is who is supposed to help me, get ahead. And when you're looking at leadership in the military, that's like one thing that they are just pounding in your head constantly from when you get in. You know what I mean? Like leadership. You're going to be, people are going to be constantly filling your shoes, whereas that's not as available in the civilian sector. And I think that's where a lot of people, regardless of, if they retired as a colonel and now they're going to work for some big business, that, hey, this isn't laid out like it normally was for me in the military. And I kind of don't understand what they're asking of me because it's so vague. You know what I mean? Because in the military, it's like everything is just like, they will just lay out every single nick and cranny on what needs to be done for that job.
I agree and I disagree, because I hear what you're saying, and I have my own experiences, which I was surrounded by some amazing guys in fifth group early on in my military career, straight out of the Q course, and I was surrounded by just absolute winners guys, if they called today, I'd be on a plane to go anywhere in the world and meet them and just link up. But, and Rudy was the same way. But I listened to what Robert said, and I can't help but think of, going back to that basic training class and all the guys that just had, not even an airborne contract, and definitely not a Ranger contract or not an 18 X-ray contract, but just a guy that came to 30th AG, went to Sand Hills, Fort Benning, did infantry basic training, and then got put into a cog in a machine that was already in war for, or going to war even more, and everybody's busy. And I think that the military creates great leaders by default is kind of a myth. I mean, you have to be surrounded by the right people.
Right.
I mean, I don't want all the hate mail that says, like, Scott came on and said the military doesn't create leaders. And Robert never invites me back to.
That's not going to happen.
You're spot on, brother. It does not create leaders. And I was going to ask this question, but this is a perfect tie-in. I was going to ask you guys, if you had to nail it down to one critical factor on what makes a good leader, what would that factor be? And to your point, Scott, the military does not create leaders. An individual has to, at least this is my opinion, I'll get yours. An individual has to want, and he has to have the desire to lead. That, to me, is the most critical component. You could teach a monkey how to do a lot of things. Does he want to do it? And that's what makes really good leaders, when they want that extra burden, they want that extra responsibility, because they're passionate about it and they just desire it. That would be my response to that. But I think you're spot on, Scott.
Well, it's not just the additional responsibilities and everything that come with leadership. And to your question, I mean, selflessness is part of that. I mean, you've got to give of yourself in learning and making mistakes, being very vulnerable. And vulnerable maybe perhaps in telling your subordinates that you're not as familiar with what they're doing if you're placed in a leadership position that's unfamiliar. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's also giving of yourself, your time. There's more than just you. You're influencing and building other people. It's about their accomplishments, not your own. And to that point, it was all about you so that you could get to that point. You were in the race in a lot of cases. And some people forget that they're no longer in the race when they become a leader. They think they're still part of that journey, that they're still supposed to be climbing that ladder. And in the fight, when you got to realize when you become a leader, no, it's about the development of others. It's not the development of you any longer. I don't think some really are prepared for that part of it.
Yeah, you could tell. They'll wash out quick. And they'll burn out, they'll wash out, they'll make excuses, they'll find a reason to slink off into the shadows and fade away. Yeah, those aren't true leaders.
They don't have it in them. They don't have the requisite material to carry the title, right? I was on another podcast months ago, the leadership podcast, and it was run by a retired SF officer, a colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Jan Rutherford, and an IT guy in Chicago named Jim Vasilopoulos. I think I just massacred his name, but it's Greek, so he'll probably forgive me. But they study leaders across all sorts of, military and tech and just industries across the board. And Jim put a post up on LinkedIn the other day that said, a leader has to be vulnerable, and he has to be able to admit, especially to his subordinates, that sometimes, the plans are going to go right. And I'm kind of taking the post, and it was more succinct than I'm making it. But, in essence, I think to answer Rudy's question, vulnerability and just the ability to say, like, all right, guys, that definitely did not go to plan. But vulnerability coupled with pride, and especially when you get, a lot of leaders from Ivy League schools, or a lot of leaders from a military academy, or a lot of leaders that think that they're entitled. So that vulnerability to say, okay, guys, we have to adjust fire and we have to go. Like, my plan absolutely did not work. That's what makes a leader to me, is a guy that can say, like, all right, this was our strategic objective. We hit all our operational tasks, and we're fighting at the tactical level. We're doing this stuff, and we're still not gaining any traction, not moving forward. Everything is going wrong. We're failing. Just that ability to say it. And when I get crushed on social media because I say things like, I don't think Steve Jobs was a leader. I think he was a visionary. I don't think he was a leader. I think that he was a tyrant and a dictator. I don't think he was a leader. And again, here comes the hate mail, right? But I think a leader has to be vulnerable. Yeah.
I think even more than that is
Rudy said that, so send him mail as well.
Yeah, send it to me, man. I'm up. Hey, I would jump on the bandwagon. Just line them up behind me.
Along with everybody else that's giving shit. I think with what Scott said about being vulnerable and admitting when you're wrong or admitting when something isn't going right, but I think what's more important than that is that the ability of the people who you're influencing still want to follow you and still trust you, even when things go the wrong way.
Right.
And that's how you can actually look, reflect upon yourself and what you're doing. Like, yeah, I am influencing these people the right way. And we can get the job done because they trust me. Even if it's not the right outcome or, not preferable, then I think that's really important to see how that's reflecting on the people that you are leading.
My old captain, Pete Sims, typical thing that SF guys typically hate, right? A, he's a captain. We all kind of like temporary help or whatever, right? B, he's a West Pointer. So he double-edged sword there. But I mean, and my older brother's a West Pointer, as everybody knows. So I'm not like trouncing the institution or anything. But anyway, Pete was amazing. There's probably not a day that goes by in my personal professional life that I don't think of something in the years that I was with Pete on the team that I don't think that there's something that he did to influence my life. Just how he reacted to something, how he could have done it better, probably, most likely, but he didn't, and he let us fail, let me fail as a growing NCO. And I truly thank him. And I mean, all the NCOs and senior NCOs on my ODA definitely had the same amount of development to me personally as he did. But I thank him every day that he gave me the opportunities to do the things that I did, and they grew me professionally, both in the military and for preparation outside of the military and the government and elsewhere. That just made me who I am. And it's just the little things that I think of that he did. It's nothing big, right? We didn't design the Apple II together. He didn't, come trouncing in every day and yell at me and do whatever else. But it was just the little things, just the lessons of accountability of your handbook and your property book, right? I mean, the lessons that he imparted every single day just by being the character of guy that he was while being vulnerable. And it was absolutely amazing to look back on and see.
It's funny that you mentioned that type of example, because actually the guy that mentored me, or I look as my first mentor, was an individual that when you think back of what he really did, he didn't do the major things, but yet he led by example by the small things is what really attracted me to his leadership, what he was doing, how he influenced others, because he wasn't out there trying to be the leader. He was already the leader, and when he walked in the room, people knew it, type of thing. It was just one of those things,
You said that so much better than I did, Robert. I'm going to put the words back on.
But Robert, that speaks directly to my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, he demonstrated all of that, and from what you're describing, he didn't force it down your throat. He just did it naturally. Yet you had the desire and the will to observe that,
right, and
use it accordingly. That was my point before.
Right.
Is you got to want it to be a good leader. You got to want it, and a lot of times you've got damn good leaders that are doing the job, and maybe they're not as focused on the mentoring side, but they are good leaders. And the up and comers will notice that, and they will take the good with the good and leave the bad with the bad. To me, that's
interesting.
Critical factor.
That's pretty interesting, Rudy, because the great tie-in to that, in my head spinning right now, is that not only do you have to want to be a leader, but since we're talking leadership development, you have to want or be able to be developed as a young leader. Yes. And far too often we see guys, I mean, again, thinking back to the young infantryman or the young motor T mechanic or the young whatever, right? The E2, E3 that just got out of basic training and is feeling pretty sorry for himself because the recruiter lied to him and everything's not going the way he thought it would go. But I can't imagine how many opportunities they just bypass by default because they don't take the initiative to learn from those and to open up their eyes and see what's going on around them. And they just close down to it because, I got a year-long deployment coming up, or, I got to go to training, and my wife's already pissed off at me because I'm at work today and whatever, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that we as young developees don't listen to the developers as they're trying to impart their knowledge. So it's definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop. I'll give you an example of myself just last month. I think it was a month ago, Robert. I talked to you. I was down in Tampa SOCOM was doing a big contract, and they do what they call a business day where all the different vendors from all across the defense contract community come down. And I had never been to one of those before. Your learning and your development never stops. I'm a fairly senior dude. I've got tons of experience in a lot of different things, but I had never done an event like this before. So I'm calling back to my partners who I work with and asking some pretty silly questions to them because they've been doing it for years. I wasn't afraid to ask those questions because I didn't know. I needed, at that moment in time, extra help or development or insight, whatever you want to call it, to be successful down there in Tampa, which we were. And, I don't think there's a cap on it. There's never you should never stop wanting to learn. You should never stop wanting to be developed because no one person is an expert at everything. It's that desire to want to be better. It's that desire to lead. It's that desire to mentor and all that and tying it back into a transition that you can't put a price on that, man. It's invaluable to any type of corporation. I don't care if you're making pens or selling ketchup or building computers or whatever, Yeah,
I think it's really important just as a leader to want to be constantly learning. And that's what's, I think, if you look at the last 10 years that we've been at war, it's we haven't constantly been learning. We've been just stuck back at, 2001. And then now all of these issues are coming up because we haven't from that time. Right. And it's I'm taking these social work classes right now. And, for a social worker, you have to constantly have so many hours a year to keep your license. And there's just a variety of trainings that you can go to. And my instructor, she's made a really good point. She's like, something new will always come up. And if you take the time and devote yourself to your craft, then you're going to be able to influence the people that you need to properly. And that's times are going to just consistently change. And it's, I look at my girls and they're so small, and how my influence as a child is so much different to what their influence is now. And that's, I think, what people have a hard time with is the adjustment of change and having to constantly be, I was told this, but now I'm told this, and just to roll with it. So education is so important, and wanting to
change. That's a neat concept there.
Yeah.
Because another story, my youngest son is autistic, and he's got this big bearded tough guy dad, and he has an autistic meltdown, and I'm looking at it puzzled, and I had to completely change my approach to raising my youngest son because of the autism. And it's so overwhelming sometimes, yet you have to have that desire to learn, to adapt, and to try new things and different things and change in order to be successful. And I don't know, man. I can't. I'll talk all day on that subject, but
it's such a struggle when you have to go through that process. But once you actually, you come to the point where you are comfortable with, now that you have to learn about autism and what mannerisms your son has. But now that I'm sure that you probably understand, it's a success. You know what I mean? And you're more driven to constantly be learning because, one, you love him and you want him to be successful in life. And it's important to you now.
Yeah.
Well, you guys always do on the teams something that conventional Army doesn't always do, and that's an AAR. So you do an after-action review all the time, and by doing that, you're able to look back retrospectively and see how should you have done things. You call people out individually, the whole thing. Well, you got to do the same thing. You got to look at yourself at times and reevaluate what you're doing, what you did in the past. I can't tell you how many times I've woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I go, geez, I should have done X, or why did I say that? I need to clarify that tomorrow with this individual so that they clearly understand what my intent was or what I was trying to go with. If you don't do that and you're not waking up in the middle of the night, then you're not really maybe thinking about how you're being, received.
That's maturity and vulnerability.
Yeah.
Waking up in the middle of the night and being able to go and to talk to that person the next day. So a lot of people can't do that.
Think that no, agreed.
That's why I've got the gray in my beard, Kat. So.
And they won't do it. And I think that, it's almost a toss-up sometimes. If I had to think of one of the single biggest lessons I learned from my time in SF, it would definitely be AARs. after action reviews are absolutely brutal. Sometimes you're just sitting there and it's like the world is just taking a crap on you because of something that you did, and you're feeling sorry for yourself, and it's horrible, especially as a new guy on a team or whatever. But they are absolutely gold as far as how you can learn to grow as both a person. I hate the word operator, but I do AARs constantly. And it's so ingrained in me from my time in the teams. And I have a funny story, right? So here I leave the teams as a young NCO, and I go the government route, and I'm now a lieutenant colonel equivalent in MARSOC, right? So I'm standing up the 3X section of MARSOC at the regimental level, and I would go to all these meetings, and I had these Marine gunnery sergeants or master sergeants that worked for me as a direct report, and I would ask them every time we left the meeting, hey man, what did I say that was good, or what did I say that was stupid in the meeting? And they would always say at first when they started working for me, everything was great. And I knew it wasn't great because I'm briefing 2 stars and colonels and 1 stars and whatever. So finally I had this one ops chief that worked for me. He's a pretty famous Marine. His nickname's Pappy. Awesome dude. Amazing guy. So finally, Pappy, for the first 6 months he worked for me, every meeting we left, I'd be like, hey man, what did I say that was stupid? And he'd go, nah man, you're fine. He's from Western North Carolina, right? Like, nah man, you're all right. Nah, Scott, you're good. And finally, after about 6 months, I walked out of a meeting with the 2-star general, and Pappy goes, before I could even ask him, he goes, man, the general really hated it when you said big boy rules apply. And I said, yeah, dude. And he knew. Like, I started ingraining within my organization, in my small world, that this is what we do. We critique ourselves, and we learn from our mistakes, and we think of things to sustain and things to improve, and all this stuff that we do. But I won't get off in this conversation, and I'll AAR what I said,
Yep.
and I'll AAR, my timelines, and I'll AAR whatever. I'll AAR the comment I just make while Robert or Rudy starts talking. I AAR constantly. Trying to develop, and it's not that I'm always up in my head. I'm not some psycho perfectionist, but I consistently. I'll stop talking now.
I love.
You're spot on, Scott, because and that's a good leadership trait that you're demonstrating, in that you're creating a trust environment, because here you are speaking to your subordinates. You're conducting an AAR on yourself first, and you've created the environment that is open, that they feel they can trust you, that they can say, okay, Scott, you were all effed up on this, or next time don't say that, or maybe we should have stayed on topic with whatever. So,
and when he said it, I laughed, for the record. I was like, great, finally, that's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
The last perfect guy walked the earth 2,000 years ago. I know I'm not him.
Good stuff.
Thinking back, for me, it was reading. I actually started going through different training seminars online and stuff like that, but I also started reading books. Reading books, I found, was a great way for me to do development. One I shared on social media, Execution. Another one is The Extraordinary Leader by John Zinger.
I don't relate very well,
really?
Robert, reading. I mean, I'm obviously capable of reading, and I read on occasion, but
I hope so.
For me, it's I'm a hands-on guy. I built my own computer. I'm not a computer guy. I built my own computer. I've built 3 of them now for me and the boys, and they're all, we call them Death Star 1, Death Star 2, Death Star 3, because they're badass computers. But it was trial and error versus, sitting down and reading a manual on how to do it. Probably more mistakes that way, but
yeah.
Whatever, it worked out all right.
I'm more of a visual learner, and things work like you, Rudy. It's like trial and error. I need to figure out why this is right and why it's wrong too. I read, and I know how to read. I feel a little educated, but just seeing a good example of how things should be done I think is really important when you're teaching people how to learn. But I really think it's important that whoever is running, the leader, whoever is running the AR, they're not just doing it because they have to. You know what I mean? They want it to be critiqued. They want their guys to be involved and actually give their opinions. And I think that makes your guys more vulnerable and want to be open with, hey, maybe we should do this, and not so intimidated in that type of environment. And I always felt like when we did ARs, whenever I did them with, my guys, it's tell me what I did, and it's, of course, it would turn into more negatives on what I needed to do right. But I think you have to create the environment and the atmosphere for people to want to open up and actually say how they feel about things.
Powerful tools when used the right way. But you have to mentor and lead individuals to get them to understand the value in that.
And I think one of the reasons that people don't take it seriously or just gaff it off is fear. I mean, they think of fear of reprisals, fear of speaking up. And so one of the best techniques, again, going back to Pete and the leadership of my ODA, that they imparted on me is I was a very, very, very junior guy on my team for a pretty long time because I had no military experience other than the Q course and basic training in airborne school. They would start all AARs with me, the junior guy, because they didn't want my words or my thoughts to be impacted by the senior guys, because the last thing you want is me going like, oh yeah, I'll take what Greg said, mid-ranger battalion, OEF veteran, already the E7, I'll take what Greg said and I'll just couple that. So I found myself on the chopping board quite a bit because I knew that we would, in any event, right, run through a shoot house, do a transportation movement, do any logistical thing, do any type of training environment, IV day, range day, anything. And the AAR would start with, Scotty, what do you think? And I would go, ugh. And I would have to say that. And at first, it was like, and trying to tap dance. And A, you want to try and sound smart, which is rare for me. And B, you want to sound, like you know what you're doing, you're professional. But, you try and do all these things. And I was terrified. But over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I started to realize, I know this is coming. It's going to happen to me. I have to prepare myself. So it started ingraining the very essence of the AAR into me. And then I realized if I said something, even slightly confrontational, like, I don't understand why we did X like that. Why did that happen? And I could ask a question. And there was no like, oh my God, Scott, you're so stupid and you have no military time and you shouldn't be here. Your stuff's going to be in the hallway and get to the B team, right? There was no reprisals. There was an explanation. And sometimes the AARs got very heated, but we always knew that once that AAR was conducted and done, it was beer time, right? I mean, it was time to we're all brothers again. You could battle and go to war with somebody over your thoughts on there, and it was a safe space. God, I hate that word. A safe space to do that, but you could still have that ability to battle with somebody, air your grievances, air your thoughts, air your concerns, air whatever lessons learned that you wanted to, and at the end of the day, it's family time again, right? I mean, you just put it under the bridge, and water starts flowing again.
I think what we just talked about is being vulnerable, having some selflessness about you. Not everyone learns the same way. Learn how to adapt. Do after-action reports on your team as well as yourself. You're going to learn. You're going to see the bad from other leaders, grow from that. Hey, just get out there. I mean, one of the best ways to be a leader is just getting out there and being a leader.
The desire to lead.
Be okay with failure.
So kind of an intimate personal story of mine is back in 2004. I lost 4 teammates in Afghanistan down in Maruf Valley. It was horrible. I was devastated. I was crushed. I lost my team leader. I lost my senior weapons guy. I lost 2 Navy SEALs that were with us. And it could have been prevented. And I felt, for the longest time, I felt responsible for that because there was a lot of things I could have done differently as the second in command on that detachment for that mission. Again, I tie that back into, first of all, you recognize a mistake was made, and it was tragic. But regardless, everyone on the team is now looking at me at that moment and in the gunfight, and you have to want to do it, and you have to have that desire to not quit. I wanted to crawl under a fucking rock in the fetal position and hide. It was horrible. It was devastating. But we grow, we learn from our mistakes, and move on. But to me, that the most powerful thing to being a leader, a successful leader, is a desire to want to be a good leader. I think that's critical.
And just to add to that, I think a lot of people, especially leaders, when they do fail or when there's no success or they don't get that next promotion or one of their guys fails, is that they feel a really strong sense of shame, and it's hard to battle and they don't like to admit to it. So yeah. You kind of fall, you feel like that's it for you. The last few months, I know I've been, in the background for a little bit, and it's been really tough for me, but I'm growing as a person, understanding that, I know that I'm a good leader. I don't need to be so critical, and I need to accept that it's okay to not be as successful.
I've had the worst professional year of my adult life, and I'm 41 years old now. Horrific. I won't go into details. And again, I hear myself telling people like, hey man, buck up, never quit, it'll get better, this, that, whatever. And so finally, like we have to realize if we espouse these ideals, then we have to be able to say to ourselves, hey, it's all right, Scott, figure it the hell out, man. Like get up, pick it up and go and figure it out, quit feeling sorry for yourself, quit doing this, quit doing whatever. And Robert asked me about books, and I didn't answer. But so I'm listening to McChrystal's books right now. I finished Team of Teams months ago, and I like that very much. And I like his new bio, not new bio, but I'm listening to his bio, My Share of the Task. And so it's weird because he's a 4-star general when he writes it, right? But I mean, if you look at how he, as a leader, identified what an organization like JSOC was doing great and poorly in Iraq and Afghanistan. They transformed operations at a very high level, on the ground, real time, on the fly. And that's a pretty cool example of leadership, about as pure as it gets. And it was impressive as hell. But one of my default leadership books that I recommend to everybody is, it's not military related at all, but it's Entree Leadership by Dave Ramsey. And if you know Dave Ramsey, the financial guy, he made millions of dollars when he was in his early 20s in the real estate markets, and it collapsed on him, and he went broke, like red beans and rice, lights being turned off, wife and kids almost going hungry, broke, creditors calling, had to trade his Mercedes in for a 20-year-old beater car and everything else. But he took those lessons. Yeah, he took those lessons, and he just grew, and now he's hundreds of millions of dollars in financial advice and common sense practices. And Entree Leadership is all about, most importantly, number one, that failure that made him who he is, and number two, the leadership principles that 20 years in the trenches of running this massive business have taught him. And it's absolutely eye-opening when you look at it from a pure civilian perspective, and when you can translate, as we all can, the civilian to military talk, the lessons and the things that he's doing and the way that he runs that Lampo group in the organization, it's pretty on par with how I would run it, with the lessons that I learned in, what I would deem pretty elite military units.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and at Facebook by searching at Mentors4MIL, and please subscribe to our podcast. It's free, and it ensures you're the first to hear our latest podcast show. We have several options depending upon your device, and we're at iTunes, SoundCloud, at Stitcher, and at TuneIn Radio. It doesn't matter whether you are searching for your passion or purpose, finding your way through a military or civilian career, working on your fitness, or just about to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Get after it.